All right. Welcome back. I could get used to this. I'll try not to rock too much. Sunday morning here in Florida, 70 degrees, almost perfect. Maybe it could be a few degrees cooler, but it is a fucking fine morning to talk about last night's shellacking of the Syracuse Orangemen. Really was never a game from the start. Coming into the game, I think FSU was about a 7-point favorite. And, there was some hand wringing. Does Schrader start? Does he not start? We knew if he didn't start, it'd be a blowout. We knew if Schrader did start, probably still win comfortably, but maybe the margin of victory would be smaller. Well, it didn't matter who started. Schrader, Shredder, Cheddar, doesn't fucking matter. From the very beginning, FSU imposed its will on the team. And let's go over some team stats of the game. I actually decided not to be completely lazy, and wrote a few of them down, which anyone could get online and find these yourselves. But if you haven't looked, here's a reminder. FSU 25 first downs, Syracuse 9. Wow. Total yards, FSU 420, Syracuse 160. And what was it? Their last drive might have been their best drive versus our backups. I don't know how long that drive was, 40 plus yards. So you're talking before that last drive, they might have been around $120, somewhere in that neighborhood. Passing yards, Travis 100, the team 190, Syracuse 65. This is coming off last week's game against Miami. I think they only had like 60-something yards passing. It was less than 100. The pass defense is doing what it's done most of the year. They're keeping shit in front of it, not allowing the big play. The defensive backs seem to be playing a little better. And I think part of that is, part and parcel, is with maybe Fuller having more confidence in them. He's opening up his playbook a little bit. You're seeing some more blitzes, some more all-out blitzes. We saw some of that last night. We just brought the fucking house. Now, it helps that Schrader is still banged up, and you can tell, but having the confidence that your corners are going to provide decent coverage, you can start doing more exotic things. But I still think, for the most part, this D will stay successful, just keeping everything in front of them, especially now with Fabo back, versus as healthy as he's been since the Louisville game. The D-line's just eating, and they ate last night. Here's another example of the D-line eating. Rushing, FSU, 230 yards. Syracuse, 95. I know Tucker has been banged up lately. Maybe he's still dealing with something, but still, to hold that Syracuse team with Tucker on it, one of the best running backs in the country last year, to less than 100 total yards rushing is pretty impressive. Benson, what can you say about him at this point? He's really coming into his own. I think I've said it before, I'll say it again. I was wrong about the take. And it wasn't a question of his talent. It was a reasonable... I'm going to sound like Bud Elliott here, saying I'm wrong, but I'm not really wrong. By the way, I do like Bud Elliott's analysis. But he does that. With the really catastrophic knee injury he had, you're like, that's a take. But then part of you was like, logic tells you they probably checked him out pretty good. Otherwise, why? But then you have to go back to the Milton take, which I didn't mind the Milton take. I got it. We needed another body, a veteran. But we saw his leg. He had one leg. So you're like, eh. But Benson, once again, did work. 18 carries, 163 yards of that 230. 9.1 a carry. Now Benson on the season has 774 yards. 7.4 yards per carry. On the season, that's a good game, averaging that many yards per carry. He's averaging that on the season, 7.4. That's insane. 5 touchdowns. And I was just rewatched the condensed game that the ACC Network puts on YouTube. Recommend it if you haven't. It's like the Cliffs Notes of the game. Just shows pertinent plays, usually 15, 20 minutes long. But just on that rewatch, it's like defenders just bounce off of him. And he's getting better. There was one run, I think it was the second half. It was up the middle. Might have been 20 or 30 yards. And just watching his patience now. And my phone's hopping around, sorry. Watching his patient, he kind of waited for the hole to develop and had his quick feet to kind of snake through there and turn it into a big gainer. And he's 6'1", 215. So to have those quick feet he has and the top end speed, and now he's starting to get back in the groove of being a good running back in regards to waiting for holes to develop, having good vision. Because remember, he's barely played college ball the last couple seasons since he's been in college because of the injuries. So he's hitting his stride. We saw Ward play. It's about what you expected. He's been out for a while. They kind of eased him back in. He didn't quite look like himself, but that's expected. He did have a fumble, which is kind of his bugaboo. But it was glad to at least see him out there. The team as a whole, yards per play, FSU 5.9, Syracuse 3.3, which is just... Before that last drive, I think that yards per play for Syracuse was like, no hyperbole here, around 2 yards per play. Like, no joke. So even though we get... You have to preface all this success because you can't just totally, be over the moon without some context. Yeah, Syracuse is banged up. Schrader, offensive line. But to hold a team to pretty much 2 yards of play until the last drive is dominance. There's no other way to cut it. There's no other way to slice it. 5.9 yards per play is under FSU's season average. 5.9 is good, not great, but it didn't really affect the scoreboard as much, having a lesser yards per play than they do on the season because they had all those short fields to work with because the defense was dominating and the offense took advantage of those short fields. So the 420 yards, which that's below the season average, still were able to rack up 38 because the defense kept, setting you up in a good spot to kick ass. The offensive game plan, again, I'm not a huge X's and O's guys, but going into the game, if you read what would make most sense versus Syracuse defense, and I think Syracuse plays with a lot of 3-down linemen, I believe, and they often have 6 to 8 guys in coverage at any given time. That one, it would make sense to run, yes, but two, I listened to different pods that said, a good idea might be do what some other teams have done and just run right down the middle, like not less counter, which FSU, Mike Norvell loves counter. And there was counter ran in this game, but there was less of it. I think you saw a little bit more inside zone, and you saw Benson just gashing him up the middle over and over. And yes, he had some outside runs too, but so you wanted to see that, seeing how that sounded like a good game plan, because if you go counter, you're spreading them out. You'd give Syracuse an opportunity with the speed because they've had all those DBs on the field to blow up that counter because they have too much speed to maybe knife through some gaps as the counter's developing. So you wanted to more run directly at them, and they did more of that than the previous game. Previous game, of course, according to the Hurricanes defensive coordinator, FSU ran 32 counters, and he could do nothing to stop it. But you didn't have to do that as much this time. You can just run it right at Syracuse, and they did that. And the other thing I remember listening to was a good idea would be the quick pass game to the sidelines because of all the DBs they have spread all over. You're not going to get a ton of plays in the middle of the field, and you saw a lot of sideline passes. You saw tight end screens outside the hash. And the last thing I recall that was kind of a key to combating Syracuse style of defense is up-tempo. And the first half, FSU was not going like ludicrous speed or anything, but it was pretty up-tempo the first half for the most part, I'd say. Second half, they kind of slowed it down for obvious reasons, just trying to get out Dodge. So really hard to complain about the offensive play calling. It was pretty much, if you listen to the people that actually know ball, it was pretty much the strategy you wanted to see the offensive employ with the previous things I just mentioned. Gotta mention the little trick play at the goal line to Travis. And Travis is, I think, what did it say, the first FSU player since 1995? Or maybe ever. I can't remember. Someone can correct me in the comments. First FSU player to have a throwing, rushing, and receiving TD in a game. And Travis didn't need to be great. Again, a lot of these were wide receiver screens. You saw, and smartly, two of those screens were to the big guys, and so they just bitched Syracuse's corners out the way for the TD. But Travis, 21 of 23, only 2 incompletions. Of course, when you throw short passes, that you're likely to have a higher completion percentage. Only 155 yards, but again, didn't matter too much because he had short fields, so he still wound up with 3 passing TDs. Just didn't matter. So now, with that game in the books, and it's crazy because, like, you know, Syracuse has obviously had injuries, and they're on a 4-game losing streak. But rewind 4 games ago, so like a month ago, they're 6-0. If you're an FSU fan, you might think, man, maybe you could beat them because we were just coming off the Clemson loss, and Clemson's much better, and we hung with them. But I think a month ago, none of us would have predicted you're going to go and just smoke Syracuse 38-3. And so that was the 3rd consecutive rocking chair game, which I was out here last night. And it's just awesome, man, because if you're an FSU fan for, you know, more than this year, the past few years, they've been rough. The previous 5 seasons have been absolute ass. And I'm 40, like Gundy, and I've seen it all. I've seen, you know, the 90s success. Obviously I saw the Jimbo success. And so coming down these last few years, it's like, wow, okay, I miss those times when we were good. So you like really appreciate nights like last night. And the last 3 games, I made sure to write this down, and I know it was tweeted elsewhere. So Georgia Tech, Miami, and Syracuse. FSU's beat those teams by a combined 124-22. And I forgot I think it was a former FSU beat guy, Kurt Weiler, tweeted out, you know, there hasn't been that kind of dominance since the 2013 team. No FSU team since 2013 has beat 3 consecutive opponents by 20-plus points. And he's not trying to say this is the 2013 team. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is literal. FSU fans haven't seen this dominance in like almost a decade. And then I know a part of me thinks back, damn, how did we fucking... I mean, I know how we lost to NC State, the buffoonery that happened. But even Clemson and Wake, man, those few things go the other way. Maybe you have less injuries during that time of year. You know, few better coaching decisions during that game. Maybe this FSU team is looking at, you know, 8-2, maybe even 9-1. But that's in the past. Right now they're 7-3. They haven't touched 7 wins since 2017, and that included a bowl win because the regular season was 6-6 that year. Beat Florida to get to 6 wins. I was at that game actually. So it's been a hot minute. Since this team has even touched 7 wins. And next week they play Cupcake, Louisiana. So that's going to be 8. So now I think that's a good time to talk macro about this program and where it's at. Can put this fucking paper to the side. I'm gonna get my coffee for a second. Oh fuck. But talking macro. Phone's still bouncing around. Sorry. You're gonna beat the Cupcake again. That's 8 guaranteed wins coming into this season. Of course, once the season starts and you get 4 or 5 games in, a lot of things go out the window. But for me, at least for me, I was thinking, give me 7-5 or better. I thought that was reasonable, seeing what we saw the previous 2 seasons, Mike's first 2 seasons, not knowing what these transfer wide receivers would be, not knowing what Benson would be, unsure of if the O-line would take another step, not knowing how good Verse would be. But still, you thought, or at least I thought, All right, give me 7 and 5 or better. You can do that. Okay. Well, they're guaranteed 8 wins. They're going to beat Louisiana next week. I'm sure the spread will be like -20 for FSU, somewhere in that ballpark. So they're going to go to 8 wins. UF will stand between FSU and a 9-3 season, which 9-3. I'm sure there were some FSU fans out there that were hopeful for 9+ wins, but I think at least the fans I interact with on Twitter and just socially, most reasonable people didn't have 9-3 on their bingo card. So I think at this point, it's clear to see, even to the most casual fan who doesn't look at stats, forget advanced metrics, they just kind of look at W's and L's. Even to that fan, there's no questioning this team is on the right track. I don't know if Mike's the guy. That's still to be determined, because when we say the guy, we're talking a coach that gets you to conference titles, gets you an opportunity to play in the college football playoff. And now that it's expanding to 12 teams, that becomes a little more achievable. I don't know if he's that guy, but he is the guy currently that has him headed in the right direction. And so it would be, I don't want to say it's a must win, but it feels like a must win because you're in year 3. Florida's in year 1. You're playing great right now. You're just dominating. I don't care if the teams are good or bad. You're dominating. This FSU hasn't dominated hardly anyone the past 5 years. You ought to beat Florida at home. It's not going to be easy. I'm not expecting a blowout. You know, you got to sell out against the run. This is obvious strategy. Sell out against the run. Try and make AR beat you with his arm. And just get the win. I don't care how you get the win over Florida. Just get it. And then 9-3, you're probably looking at outside chance of a New Year's Six bowl. Maybe. So, 8-4, 9-3, doesn't matter. Going into next season, what needs to happen? Couple things. Before the season started, I said, I don't care how many wins they get. 7, 8, whatever. You need to upgrade this staff because the recruiting is clearly lacking. Okay, now these wins should help recruit better, especially for the 24 class. 23 class is about a wrap. Maybe you add a couple guys, but right now you're sitting beneath teams like South Carolina and Arkansas. You're not even in the top 15, and I get it. You know, your first 2 years you won 8 games combined. This team hasn't had a one winning season in the previous 5, I think. Or maybe it's none in the one. Yeah, 2017, 7-6. Yeah. So I get it. A lot of negative recruiting. So this 23 class had a ceiling. The ceiling was likely somewhere between 10 and 15, but right now you're not even there. But now that you've won games, again, you're guaranteed 8. We need to start seeing the effects of winning on the trail. You're the best team in the state of Florida, a fertile recruiting ground. You're the best team in the state right now. We'll see what happens against Florida, but right now you are. We need to start getting a buzz about how the Noles are picking up steam on the trail. But getting back to my point, 7 wins or 8 wins, you need to replace guys like whether it's Thompson. I mean, he has like 5 or 6 tight ends on scholarship. None of them can play. Okay, that sounds a little harsh, but they leave a lot to be desired as far as a tight end goes. We haven't had a decent tight end since O'Leary, which is a long time ago. So Thompson does a whole lot of nothing on the trail, seemingly. Who do you get to replace him? Grab Jeff Scott, just got fired from South Florida. Got Florida recruiting ties. Hey, make him the tight ends coach. I don't care. Then on the but I'm less concerned about the offense. But that's one obvious guy that could go. Dugans has redeemed himself a little bit. But on the defensive side, that's where you're like definitely lacking elite players coming in on that side of the ball. Odell's not going anywhere. I won't even mention him. But Buchis is doing fine, whether it's on the field or in recruiting. Shannon, I still question as a good recruiter. Even with the Nicholson acquisition, the 4-star linebacker, a lot of that was a guy named Vray that the Knowles have on staff who has West Coast ties. So it's hard for me to give Shannon full credit for that. So then you go to Woodson. By and large, the defensive backs have been the worst segment of this defense for most of the year. And he's not really cooking on the trail. So if you're going to defense, Woodson might be a guy you want to really consider replacing. And now that you're going to have 8 or 9 wins, you're going to have ammunition. Whether that's the backing from boosters when it comes to money, to give you more money to pay for coaches, and more ammunition to sell when you're going out there and saying, hey, really would like you to come be our defensive backs coach. It's a lot easier to sell now than it was a year ago. Hey, I just won 8 or 9 games. I'm not going anywhere. As opposed to last year. Hey, I've won 8 games in 2 years. Maybe I'll be around. You want to come work for me? Like, you should have enough to go at least get one more better recruiter. I'd love 2. And keeping it with recruiting, this season, as some analysts have said, is likely going to impact the 24 class more. Okay? And so far, very early, they've already have a great start to the 24 class. I think number 5 or 6 in the country, but there's a long way to go. But in your turnaround season, you ought to be trending upwards in recruiting. You need to find a way to grab a couple guys here down the stretch to finish in the top 15. And then going into next year, we'll see who stays, who goes. But next year, if you're knocking on 9+ wins again, you ought to be in a minimum top 10 recruiting class. You're seeing what Miami's doing. I get it. They got the new coach smell. They got a billionaire backing them. You see what Florida's doing. Again, new coach smell. Their collective seems to be doing well. I get it. But they have top 10 classes. If they go out next year and have a decent season, their recruiting prowess isn't slowing down. So you need to keep up with the Joneses in that regard. I know the football-only facility is supposed to break ground maybe next month. That will help. But long-term, yes, this coaching staff is doing a good job with the players it has. But long-term, if we're thinking conference titles, we're thinking playing for the Natties, trying to get in the college football playoff, the recruiting hasn't been good enough, period. It's got to get better. And Mike's going to have a tough decision because it's easy to fire someone after a shitty season, but it's much harder to fire someone, especially a guy you've developed a relationship with for a few years. A lot harder to fire that guy, coming off, 8-9 win season, the best season that you've had together at this school. But that's why you get paid millions to make tough decisions. All right, well, let's end it positively. Enjoy your Sunday. Enjoy, again, a 3rd consecutive ass whooping. 124-22 the last 3 games. It's great to be a Knoll right now. We could play the would've, could've. Could be 8-2, could be 9-1 if things really broke right. But the team's the healthiest it's been all year and hitting their stride. All right, so beat the hell out of Louisiana, get to 8 wins, and we'll see Florida that Friday after Thanksgiving. Hopefully we dominate their fuck asses. All right, that's it. That's all. Until next time.